Sometimes in the fantasy game, you got to look back to get ahead, which is exactly what we're doing on the Wednesday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, taking a look at some of the best seasons in the fantasy realm from non-playoff teams, starting in the Eastern Conference. Thank you so much for joining me.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hockey heads, fantasy fanatics, and degenerate gamblers, stand up, unite. This is your show. It's the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Riding solo today, just your boy, Big Flip Livingstone. Shout out to the everydayers, making us your first listen, holding us down every single day, Monday through Friday. I appreciate it more than I can say. I don't have Steele here to back me up, but you know he does as well. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome back inside the lab. As always, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get 150 bones and bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Taking a little pause today, my friends, from the Stanley Cup Final. I'm going to be here tomorrow and Friday, breaking it all down for you. Friday's episode, I'm going to get to all of my series best bets. I'm going to talk about some of the Conn Smythe odds that I like the most. I didn't give you too much of my take on what I think is going to go down in this Cup Final. Friday's episode, make sure you check it out. We're going to tee up everything that you need for the Stanley Cup Final. But on today's episode and on tomorrow's episode, I'm taking a look at some of the best fantasy seasons from non-playoff teams, players on teams that didn't crack the postseason. And the reason why is because a number of these players, if you have them on your team next year, you're going to be ahead of the game. However, I'm also taking a look at some players that you need to know about that might also be tough to replicate their success. Both are worthy angles to be covered, and on today's episode, I'm going to do just that. However, I just got to show some love to the two teams that are in the Stanley Cup Final. I'm going to get into depth about it, obviously, on Friday's episode. Hearing all of the pressers, hearing the media over the last couple of days, these are the two best teams in the NHL, and obviously that's a pretty easy statement considering where you find both Edmonton and the Florida Panthers. But looking at the makeup of these teams, there are so many intriguing storylines. Bob versus Stuart Skinner, a deep, talented Florida rolling four lines, three lines, say what you will. Are the bottom six of Edmonton going to be able to respond? Do the Edmonton Oilers have enough defensive depth? There's a lot of intriguing questions, storylines. I'll get there. Don't you worry. Friday, make sure you're tapped in. Today, I'm going to take a look at these great fantasy seasons by guys on non-playoff teams, and I'm taking a look squarely, number one, at the Philadelphia Flyers' Travis Konecny. This is one of those guys, I alluded to it off the top. If you can get him on your fantasy team along with a couple of the other pieces on this list, he is just such a balanced player on the ice, and that shows in his peripheral category value. 90 block shots, 90 hits, 32 block shots. He had 67 penalty minutes. He led the NHL last year in shorthanded goals with 6. He's also, ladies and gentlemen, and this is why this is going to be on my draft card for the upcoming draft season. He is in a contract year. Right now, he's making $5.5. He's in line for a payday. And if he puts up another season of 60-plus points while bringing that effectiveness on special teams, especially killing penalties and scoring shorthanded goals, in a contract year, I'm taking a look at him for a major fantasy season upcoming. Obviously, when paydays are on the line, that's an intriguing angle to be looking at. When I take a look at Travis Konecny, I already liked so much about his game, and then you add in that little wrinkle of his pending payday. I'm really intrigued. And the final angle here with Travis Konecny, a great season on a team that in the Philadelphia Flyers punched above their weight class for most of the season. I think we can all agree that they overachieved. They were holding down that third spot in the Metro for most of the regular season to only squander it in the second half, definitely down the stretch. Say what you will about John Tortorella. But this Philadelphia Flyers club has a lot of very intriguing young forwards. Tyson Foerster. Obviously, Konechny's not that young, but intriguing enough. Morgan Frost, Bobby Brink, Owen Tippett, Noah Cates, even a good season last year from Joel Farabee. definitely lots to like in terms of where this team is headed up front. The questions, obviously, like always over the past 2 decades, perhaps, with this Flyers club is in the cage. Samuel Ursin, Fedotov. Fedotov comes in out of northern Russia, out of nowhere, and plays pretty solid for them. Those will be angles that I'm going to have to continue to break down into the offseason, because I'm going to have to do a little bit more digging into the numbers on the Philadelphia Flyers. However, when it comes to Travis Konecny, he deserves some love as a really good fantasy season on a non-playoff team. That's number one. I had to get him off the chest. By the way, he was drafted in around the 120th slot in Yahoo, a little higher on ESPN this past season. He was on average roughly the 12th or 13th right winger off the board, according to Fantasy Pros. I think he's going to move up slightly given how solid of a season he had, and I think a little bit of a step forward for this Philadelphia Flyers club in terms of their offensive output, at least. All of those things are good for Konecny. Let's head over to a team that is also very much in flux, a young team. I got 2 players on the Montreal Canadiens, and we've talked a lot about the Edmonton Oilers, the Florida Panthers, all the teams in the playoffs. That's why I wanted to give some love and to the teams and the players that aren't there right now, switching it up a little bit. I feel like it's been forever since I've spoken about the Montreal Canadiens. And you know what, my friends? This is a team that is obviously searching for identity. They have a number of players that I think, Josh Anderson's of the world, Tanner Pearson's, Brendan Gallagher's. You got to have some vets, but I'm looking for this team to really turn the page. And I know that's obviously easier said than done considering all the money that they have wrapped up into those pieces. However, Juraj Slafkovsky, Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, obviously, that's the future right there. I actually really like Sam Montembeault in the cage. I know that's been a bit of a polarizing situation for the Montreal Canadiens over the past 3 decades, goaltending, aside from Carey Price. Obviously, it's a hot topic in Montreal. Nick Suzuki is my player, though, because sometimes I come on this show and I get a little carried away in terms of the players that I see get it done on the ice. And sometimes that doesn't translate always into the kind of fantasy value that I expect. Nick Suzuki is the prototypical captain, high hockey IQ. He's a very sound player at both ends of the ice. And he has been steadily improving his production since coming into the NHL. 3 seasons ago, 61 points. Last season, 66 points. And then this season, his best yet, his highest goal total, his highest assist total, and then obviously his highest point total, 69 hits, almost 50 block shots. He chips in, obviously shots on net you'd like to see come up for a player who does have a sneaky good shot. Nick Suzuki deserves a lot of credit for just being one of the best all-around forwards in the game. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Go ahead and get you some Nick Suzuki next year. This guy has all the potential to score 85-plus points, and I think you're going to see it. I think maybe a healthier, more confident Cole Caulfield, Juraj Slafkovsky in there now. This is going to be a very good situation for that top line in Montreal next season. I love Marty St. Louis behind the bench. Say what you will about the rest of the Montreal Canadiens, and we'll talk about one of their rear guards right after the break. But that top line is going to be worth the price of admission next season. You heard it here first. That's not a bold take. With Juraj Slafkovsky coming on the way that he did this season, finally showing why the Montreal Canadiens did what they did in drafting him first overall, then let's just see what the Montreal Canadiens can do on the back end, because obviously, just like a whole bunch of other teams out there, the blue line needs to be addressed. We'll talk a little bit more about the Montreal Canadiens right around the break. A couple of more great fantasy seasons from players on non-playoff teams. But, we got to talk about our friends today at FanDuel Sportsbook, baby. That's where Steele and I have been making all of our bets. You got to be checking out FanDuel today. The playoffs are on, and it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets. With any winning $5 bet, that's 150 bones to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and a whole lot more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. My friends, shout out to all of y'all holding me down. Solo episodes, obviously I miss Steele. I'm hoping to just bring a little bit of fresh hockey takes to the head tops here. Everybody's been talking about the two teams in the Stanley Cup Final. We've been covering them now for weeks. I needed to come on here and talk about some different angles, and I'm going to continue to talk about the Stanley Cup Final as it unfolds. Of course, I'm going to holler at you guys with all of my series best bets, Conn Smythe picks. I got more X Factors. Friday's episode is going to be fire. The rest of today, I hope you find to be the same. Now, as I jot down a quick note here for myself, I have to also continue to round out my point on Nick Suzuki, because when you take a look at what he's been able to do on the Montreal Canadiens with an influx of forwards, even Cole Caulfield, his wingman, he's obviously been injured in and out of the lineup. Nick Suzuki hasn't missed a game in 3 seasons, actually maybe even in 4 seasons. He is a warrior. I love what he brings to the table, and he is going to be one of those players that I'm looking at next season. He needed some love. Over to a teammate of his, and Mike Matheson. Look, Mike Matheson got that massive payday a number of years ago from the Florida Panthers. Everyone was kind of scratching their heads at that one. Then he throws out a couple of really poor seasons, 27 points, 31 points. And as much as that might be where we should expect, the Florida Panthers saw something in him. And last year, I actually think even the season before, at the offensive end, this guy is dynamic. And he was minus 24 for sure, but he had 186 block shots. That's definitely up there amongst the leaders of the league. He brought a ton of fantasy value, and without getting too far down a rabbit hole, I bet you if you looked up at the top of your fantasy leagues this year, there was a guy or gal or two up in the top few spots that probably got Matheson way at the back end of drafts. He wasn't even on the draft board in ESPN rankings. 244th overall on Yahoo in terms of average draft position. And then my man comes in here and he puts up 62 points, 51 assists, 187 shots on net. He chips in with 61 hits, 58 penalty minutes as well. Banger league beauty this year. I don't think Mike Matheson is going to replicate 62 points. That's not exactly a hot take, but he still brings a ton of value as a defenseman who most definitely can sit there right in that 40-point realm. He puts up 31, 34, and then doubles it to 62. We're not going to expect him to put that up. He also had 5 goals on the power play, which is actually quite impressive in its own right. And when I look at everything that I had just mentioned for this Montreal Canadiens team, and you think they're going to hopefully take a little bit of a step forward now that goaltending situation is basically cemented, hopefully Sam Montembeault can take a step. That means that maybe Mike Matheson can get back to close to maybe 50, 55 points. 60 ain't happening, but when you break down all of those numbers, my goodness, and his average draft position, what a steal for whatever fantasy GMs out there got him last year, but don't reach. That's why he's on this list for twofold. To give him the love for a very good season on a team that's not in the playoffs. You know the drill on today's show. But to also be wary of overreaching on him. One really good season doesn't necessarily, it can mean good value next year in terms of replicating exactly that. But it's a very big ask, especially given all of the question marks for the rest of that blue line. How is that team going to look come training camp? These are all angles that we'll continue to cover all off season long. We ain't going nowhere. Speaking of which, there are a couple of squads here, the Red Wings, the Buffalo Sabres. These were squads that we looked at this year as potential playoff teams for sure. Teams that could be right in there on the bubble, and they were, especially in the Detroit Red Wings. And Lucas Raymond had 72 points this year, 30 goals and 41 assists. This is a 4th overall draft pick that, after coming into the league with 57 points 2 seasons ago, finishing 4th for the Calder Trophy, expectations were, deservedly so, sky high. Then he follows that up last season in 74 games. He was a little bit banged up. 45 points, down to 17 goals. The shots were way down. The confidence seemed to be down as well. And obviously his ice time took a little bit of a hit from that first season. But what's interesting is how good he was able to be this year. And I think there was a lot of fantasy people out there wanting to write off Lucas Raymond. And maybe I was one of them, but he got it done this year. 19% shooting percentage and only 163 shots on net. I think this confidence that he got from this season, you're going to see Lucas Raymond come out and blow the doors off the league next year. this is obviously one of those situations that when I looked at Cap Friendly, shout out to Cap Friendly by the by, the Detroit Red Wings have a number of UFAs. Patrick Kane, David Perron, Daniel Sprong, Shane Gostisbehere, James Reimer. This is going to be a bit of a different looking squad. And are all of those players pillars of the organization? No, they're not. But David Perron was important at times over the past season. Patrick Kane obviously was their best player down the stretch. Huge addition. I don't think he'll be back. So there will be probably some money to go around, but it's what I'm trying to get at here, trying to spit it out. This is why I need Steele to hold me down. Lucas Raymond is an RFA. He's going to get paid. He's going to remain as a key piece of this Detroit future, and that's why I think you're going to see him settle in a little bit different from Konecny, who's looking for that payday. Lucas Raymond just got it, but maybe this is the confidence that he needed. It's a bit of a double-edged sword with that one when it comes to paydays and contracts. For a younger player, maybe he just needs that confidence, this solidifying himself in this organization, because Lucas Raymond can skate. He skates like the wind. His edge work is sensational. And I really do think if he just starts to throw that puck on net just a little bit more, you're going to see his fantasy value go through the roof. And keep a close eye on the Detroit Red Wings. I mentioned those UFAs. They also have sorry, I just mentioned all of them. Moritz Seider is an RFA. That was the other thing I'm trying to spit out here. So interesting summer upcoming for the Detroit Red Wings organization after they had already made a whole ton of moves last year, bringing in a lot of fresh faces. Lucas Raymond, though, next year, double circle it for your fantasy draft preparation. Right after I give some love to all of our listeners, I'm going to wrap up this show by talking about a young and up-and-coming goalie on the Buffalo Sabres. Shout out to everyone out there holding us down. Make sure you drop us that 5-star review. Smash the subscribe button. All the feedback, it straight up and down means the world to both Steele and I can speak for myself on this one. Whenever you guys drop us a comment, let us know how your fantasy squads are doing. Hit us with your info about your teams. I straight up love it. So thank you so much. We appreciate it. And if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on TV all day and you got to turn down the volume with all that shouting, come on now. It's far too much. Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed to make every day the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On brings you everything you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7. So make sure you're checking that out. We are a part of the Locked On Network, your team every single day. The Buffalo Sabres are an intriguing team. By the way, don't miss out Friday's episode. I've been teasing it. Don't miss out tomorrow's episode. I'm going to head out west and take a look at some of the best fantasy performances from non-playoff players out west. Number of intriguing pieces, including someone I'm going to talk about right now that's very intriguing. And also, as a part of the Buffalo Sabres future, a very intriguing piece. Also an RFA, a little bit of a theme here. At 25 years old, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is going to probably be the guy next season, at least to start. Devin Levi is probably waiting in the wings. Not probably. That seems to be the guy they want to be the number one. But taking a look at UPL down the stretch, he was sensational. And his numbers overall, 27, 22, and 4, 5 shutties, 2.57 goals against, and a .910 save percentage. This kid can play. He was a second-round draft pick, 54th overall. Shout out to the Sudbury Wolves. Shout out to the Big Nickel as well. UPL was sensational down the stretch. And when you and I and Steele and all of the people on the fantasy realms get heated, usually for me, it's around goaltenders. You can never have too many. And in the Keeper Dynasty side of things, I'm not coming on here for a solo episode and not giving a little Keeper Dynasty plug, my friends. You can't afford to miss out on any kind of opportunity in your goaltending lineup. That's just maybe it's too obvious of a fact. But for me, who has been burned multiple times by bad decisions, have your finger on the pulse. In UPL, this Sabres team has so many good young pieces. Bowen Byram now in tow. Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power, obviously. They also bring in a couple of, well, not bring in, but when you look at that forward group, Peterka, Benson, Cousins, Quinn, Tuck, Thompson, even more under the radar, and Peyton Krebs, Jeff Skinner still in the mix. We thought the Buffalo Sabres were going to take a big step this year. Devin Levi, we thought, was going to be a major piece of that. Neither of those things happened off the jump. They were up and down. Tage Thompson had a poor performance. for most of the season. Alex Tuck had a dip in offensive output, and that really kind of sewered this team off the jump. A club that really hangs its hat in the offensive end, and it was one of the best squads on the power play last year. Those things didn't pan out this year, and obviously some of those fantasy pieces suffered, but UPL was not one of them. And as I said, his second half, the last 6 weeks or so of the season, 6 or 7 weeks, he proved to me that he is going to be a very valuable fantasy asset. I mentioned his numbers. He's definitely one of those good seasons on a non-playoff team, just like I've been talking about all episode long. And if he can run back even close to a 27, 22-4 record with 5 shutouts and those numbers that I just mentioned, not only are the Buffalo Sabres going to be higher up those standings and probably right there on the bubble for a playoff spot, which we expected them to be this season, he sure is going to be a draftable goaltender. Am I saying the first 6 or 7 rounds? Obviously not. This is going to be the back end of the draft, last 4 or 5 rounds, maybe 5 or 6 rounds. Maybe he's your third goaltender. A lot of leagues obviously have 2 with the backup spot. For me, he's the perfect third goalie. He might even be, in less deeper formats, he might just be that perfect week-to-week flyer. Have your eyes double circled, double peeled on this Buffalo Sabres team. UPL had to get some love from me for today's show. You know I'm serious about this stuff, guys. I ain't stopping yet with the fantasy breakdowns. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, riding just solo with your boy. I'll be back tomorrow to head out west for players on non-playoff teams that had big fantasy seasons. Friday's episode, I'm diving deep into all my favorite bets and angles for the Stanley Cup Final. Make sure you're back for both. Really appreciate y'all. Have an excellent hump day, and I will see you back here again tomorrow.